master vocal dominance. The world is not fair, and the sooner you accept this brutal truth, the sooner you stop wondering why your brilliant ideas get ignored while someone else's mediocre thoughts command absolute attention. Right now, while you're watching this, someone less intelligent than you, less knowledgeable than you, less qualified than you, is controlling entire rooms through their voice alone. Not through what they're saying, through how they're saying it, through vocal patterns that trigger psychological paralysis and force total attention regardless of content quality. Every time you speak in monotone, you're losing control of your audience's nervous system. Every time you rush your words anxiously, you're training people to tune you out. Every time your volume fluctuates uncertainly, you're broadcasting that even you don't believe what you're saying. And people are responding accordingly. Their attention drifts, their minds wander, their respect dissolves. Because your vocal patterns are communicating weakness louder than your words are communicating content. Here's the truth nobody wants to admit. Content barely matters if delivery is weak. You can have the most brilliant insight, the most valuable information, the most important message in the world. But if your vocal delivery doesn't trigger the neurological attention mechanisms in your audience, they won't hear you. They'll be physically present while mentally absent. Their brains will categorize your voice as background noise rather than priority signal. And you'll blame them for not listening when the reality is you never captured their nervous system's attention in the first place. I am Niccolò Machiavelli. 500 years ago, I observed that the most powerful speakers in Renaissance Italy weren't necessarily the most eloquent or educated. They were the ones who understood that human attention is controlled through vocal patterns that bypass conscious choice. Certain combinations of tone, volume, and rhythm trigger psychological states. Paralysis, alertness, submission, that make resistance to your message neurologically difficult. In this video, I'm going to reveal 6 ruthless techniques of vocal control that induce psychological paralysis and total attention. This isn't about having a beautiful voice. This is about weaponizing your vocal delivery to dominate the psychological state of everyone listening. Vocal dominance as psychological warfare. Machiavelli lived in Renaissance courts, where speakers competed for attention and influence daily. He noticed that power belonged not to those with the best arguments, but to those whose vocal delivery commanded involuntary attention. Their tone, volume, and rhythm bypassed rational evaluation and triggered primal attention mechanisms that made ignoring them neurologically uncomfortable. Human neurology hasn't changed. Your brain prioritizes vocal patterns that signal threat, authority, or importance. When someone speaks with specific combinations of tone and rhythm, your nervous system forces attention regardless of whether you want to listen. This isn't choice. This is hardwired survival mechanism being exploited strategically. Most people speak with weak vocal patterns, monotone delivery, rushed rhythm, uncertain volume. They think good content will overcome poor delivery. It won't, because attention is captured neurologically before content is processed consciously. Weak delivery means no attention. No attention means content is irrelevant. Now, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I control attention through my voice. 1. The drop to whisper that forces lean in. The first technique is deliberately dropping your volume to near whisper at critical moments. When you reach the most important point, instead of raising volume, you lower it dramatically. This forces your audience to lean in physically and mentally. The drop triggers. I'm about to miss something important. I must focus completely. Think about how most people emphasize important points. They raise their voice. They get louder. They think volume equals importance. This is backward. Loud volume is common. People tune it out. Whisper-level delivery is rare and triggers acute attention because missing quiet information feels dangerous. Here's what happens when you drop to whisper. Your audience's nervous system interprets the volume drop as threat of information loss. They must concentrate harder to receive the signal. This forced concentration creates psychological paralysis. They can't multitask or drift mentally because doing so means missing critical content delivered quietly. You've trapped their attention through artificial scarcity. When you raise volume for emphasis, you're doing what everyone expects. Expected patterns don't capture attention. They're processed automatically without engagement. Unexpected volume drops create cognitive disruption that forces attention reset. The audience must actively choose to follow you into the whisper, and that choice creates psychological investment. Machiavelli understood that power operates through controlling what others fear to lose. When you whisper critical information, you've made losing your words feel dangerous. The audience fears missing something important more than they value maintaining divided attention. Most people fear dropping volume because they worry about not being heard. This fear keeps them predictably loud and consequently ignored. Dominant speakers weaponize whisper drops because they understand forced attention is more valuable than comfortable audibility. One pattern says, "I'll speak loudly so everyone hears me easily." The other says, "I'll whisper critical moments forcing them to strain to hear." One is ignored. The other commands paralyzed attention. Here's the brutal truth. Your consistently loud or moderate volume is training people that nothing you say requires special attention. The drop to whisper creates artificial urgency that captures attention your normal volume never could. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I whisper to force attention. I don't shout. 2. Strategic pauses that create unbearable tension. The second technique is inserting long and comfortable pauses at unexpected moments. You stop speaking mid-thought, letting silence extend until it becomes psychologically uncomfortable. The pause triggers. Something is wrong. Why did they stop? I must pay attention to understand what's happening. Think about how most speakers handle pauses. Brief, predictable breaks at sentence ends. They're terrified of extended silence. They fill gaps reflexively with or unnecessary words. This constant verbal flow allows audiences to process you as background audio rather than prioritized signal. Here's what happens with strategic extended pauses. The silence creates cognitive void that audiences desperately want filled. Their attention spikes because the pause violates expectations. They can't predict when you'll resume, so they must maintain heightened alertness. The tension becomes unbearable, making your eventual words receive amplified attention. When you fill every moment with words, you train audiences that attention can be casual. They won't miss anything because you're constantly providing content. When you pause strategically, you create moments where missing your next word feels risky. This transforms casual listening into intense focus. Machiavelli observed that certainty makes people complacent, while uncertainty creates acute attention. Your strategic pauses weaponize uncertainty. The audience can't relax into passive listening. Because they don't know when the pause will end. You control their psychological state through timing manipulation. Most speakers can't tolerate extended pauses because silence feels like failure or awkwardness. This discomfort keeps them verbally busy and consequently ignorable. Dominant speakers weaponize uncomfortable pauses because they understand tension forces attention better than constant content. One rhythm says, "I'll keep talking to maintain engagement." The other says, "I'll pause unpredictably to create tension that demands focus." One is background noise. The other is psychological control. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your fear of silence is making you forgettable. Every pause you fill reflexively is a lost opportunity to capture attention through tension that comfortable verbal flow never creates. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I pause to create tension. Silence is my weapon. 3. Sudden volume explosions for psychological shock. The third technique is suddenly exploding into high volume after sustained quiet or moderate delivery. The unexpected loudness triggers startle response that resets attention completely. The explosion communicates emergency. This requires immediate focus. Everything else is secondary now. Think about speakers who maintain consistent volume throughout. Their delivery becomes predictable. Predictable patterns allow audiences to habituate. The brain stops processing predictable stimuli as priority. Consistent volume, regardless of level, gets categorized as non-urgent background. Here's what happens with sudden volume explosions. The dramatic increase triggers involuntary startle response. The audience's nervous system interprets sudden loudness as potential threat, forcing immediate attention reallocation. You've hijacked their automatic alertness mechanisms. They're not choosing to pay attention. Their neurology is forcing it. When you maintain consistent volume, even if it's loud, the brain habituates and attention drifts. When you explode unexpectedly from quiet to loud, you're creating novelty that the brain must process as potentially important. The sudden change forces attention reset that makes your loud words receive priority processing. Machiavelli would recognize this as exploiting hardwired threat detection. Sudden loud noises signal danger in ancestral environments. Though your audience knows consciously they're safe, their nervous system still responds to volume explosions with involuntary attention spike. You're weaponizing evolutionary mechanisms. Most speakers either stay consistently quiet or consistently loud. Both patterns allow habituation. Dominant speakers move between extremes strategically, using volume explosions to shock attention back when it drifts. They understand dramatic contrast captures attention consistency never will. One pattern says, "I'll maintain appropriate volume throughout." The other says, "I'll explode into loudness unexpectedly to trigger startle attention." One allows drift. The other forces focus. Here's the brutal truth. Your consistent volume is letting audiences habituate to your voice as ignorable background. The volume explosion creates shock that forces attention whether they want to give it or not. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I explode strategically. Shock demands attention. 4. Rhythmic acceleration that induces urgency trance. The fourth technique is progressively accelerating your speech rhythm during critical sequences. You start at normal pace, then gradually increase speed, creating momentum that pulls audiences forward psychologically. The acceleration triggers. This is building toward something important. I must keep pace mentally or lose the thread. Think about most speakers' rhythm. Consistent throughout, may be slightly varied but never strategically accelerated. Consistent rhythm is comfortable. Comfortable rhythm allows audiences to maintain divided attention, because keeping mental pace requires minimal cognitive load. Here's what happens with rhythmic acceleration. The increasing speed forces audiences to allocate more cognitive resources to tracking your words. They must concentrate harder to maintain comprehension as pace increases. This forced concentration creates what hypnotists call pacing. The audience is running mentally to keep up, which induces trance-like focus state, where they're absorbed completely in following you. When you maintain steady rhythm, audiences can listen passively while thinking about other things. When you accelerate strategically, you make passive listening impossible. They must engage actively or lose comprehension. This transforms casual audience into captive audience. Machiavelli understood that control comes from making alternatives worse than compliance. Your acceleration makes not paying attention worse than paying attention, because not tracking your accelerating rhythm means losing comprehension entirely. You've made focus the path of least resistance. Most speakers maintain comfortable rhythms because they fear losing audiences if pacing becomes difficult. This consideration keeps them ignorable. Dominant speakers accelerate strategically because they understand forced cognitive effort creates psychological investment and trance states that passive listening never achieves. One rhythm says, "I'll speak at comfortable pace so everyone follows easily." The other says, "I'll accelerate to force mental running that creates urgency trance." One allows drift. The other captures completely. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your steady rhythm is so comfortable that audiences never need to engage fully. The acceleration forces engagement by making disengagement equal to confusion. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I accelerate to capture. Rhythm controls minds. 5. Tonal authority drop that signals non-negotiability. The fifth technique is dropping your vocal tone into deep, resonant authority register when delivering non-negotiable statements. You shift from normal speaking tone into lower, more resonant frequency. The tonal drop triggers. This is authoritative truth. Questioning this feels inappropriate. Think about how most people speak. Mid-range tones throughout, may be slightly varied but never strategically dropped into authority register. Mid-range tones are conversational. Conversational tones invite debate and questioning because they signal openness to dialogue. Here's what happens with authority tone drops. Lower vocal frequencies are neurologically associated with dominance, power, and certainty across primate species. When you drop into resonant lower register, you're triggering ancient status recognition mechanisms. The audience's nervous system categorizes your lowered tone as coming from high-status source, which makes questioning feel socially risky. You've created psychological barrier to disagreement. When you maintain mid-range conversational tones, you signal that your statements are negotiable, open for discussion. When you drop into authority register, you signal statements are declarations rather than proposals. The tonal shift makes disagreement feel like challenging authority rather than participating in discussion. Machiavelli observed that perceptions of authority create compliance more reliably than actual authority. Your authority tone drop creates perception of unchallengeable certainty. Whether you actually have authority is less relevant than whether your vocal tone communicates it. Most speakers stay in mid-range because authority tones feel presumptuous or aggressive. This restraint keeps their statements perpetually debatable. Dominant speakers drop into authority register strategically because they understand tone signals, whether statements are negotiable or absolute. One approach says, "I'll maintain friendly conversational tone throughout." The other says, "I'll drop into authority register to mark statements as non-negotiable truth." One invites questioning. The other preempts it. Here's the brutal truth. Your consistent mid-range tone is making everything you say feel optional and debatable. The authority drop creates psychological acceptance that friendly tones never achieve. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I drop into authority. My tone commands acceptance. 6. Calculated vocal boredom that punishes inattention. The sixth technique is deliberately adopting bored, flat delivery when repeating information or addressing those who weren't paying attention. You shift from engaged vocal animation into dead monotone. The boredom communicates, "I'm disappointed you require repetition. Your inattention has consequences." Think about how most speakers handle repetition or inattentive audience members. They maintain helpful, patient tone. They repeat information cheerfully. They reward inattention with pleasant re-engagement. This trains audiences that drifting attention has no cost. Here's what happens with calculated vocal boredom. The shift to flat, disengaged delivery punishes the inattentive person while signaling to others that losing attention has social cost. Your bored tone communicates disappointment and unwillingness to re-engage enthusiastically. This creates fear in the broader audience. They don't want to receive your bored, dismissive repetition, so they maintain attention preemptively. When you maintain pleasant tone during repetitions, you're rewarding inattention with continued engagement. When you shift to bored dismissiveness, you're punishing inattention with social discomfort. The contrast trains audiences that your engaged, animated tone is conditional on their sustained attention. Machiavelli understood that behavioral control requires both rewards and punishments. Your animated tone rewards attention. Your bored tone punishes drift. The combination creates operant conditioning where audiences maintain focus to avoid punishment and receive reward. Most speakers stay consistently pleasant because they fear alienating audiences with tonal punishment. This unconditional positivity removes consequences for inattention. Dominant speakers weaponize bored dismissiveness strategically because they understand punishment drives better attention than consistent pleasantness. One pattern says, "I'll repeat cheerfully whenever someone missed information." The other says, "I'll deliver repetitions in punishing bored tone that discourages future inattention." One rewards drift. The other punishes it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your consistently positive tone is training audiences that inattention costs nothing. The calculated boredom creates consequences that force sustained attention. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I punish inattention. My boredom signals cost. Vocal dominance is psychological warfare. If you don't master vocal manipulation, you'll spend your entire life having brilliant ideas ignored while watching inferior minds command attention through voice control alone. This isn't about having perfect diction or vocal training. This is about understanding that human attention and psychological state are controlled through vocal patterns that bypass conscious choice. The world doesn't reward the most knowledgeable speakers. It rewards those who understand how to weaponize tone, volume, and rhythm to induce psychological paralysis. Right now, every monotone delivery, every predictable rhythm, every consistent volume is losing you control over your audience's nervous system. They're present physically while absent mentally, because your vocal patterns never captured their attention mechanisms. Stop speaking in monotone. Stop maintaining comfortable, consistent volume. Stop using predictable rhythms. Stop staying in conversational tone register. Stop rewarding inattention with pleasant repetition. These patterns are making you ignorable regardless of content quality. Start dropping to whisper at critical moments to force lean-in attention. Start inserting uncomfortable strategic pauses that create unbearable tension. Start exploding into volume unexpectedly to trigger startle response. Start accelerating rhythm to induce urgency trance. Start dropping into authority tone to signal non-negotiability. Start punishing inattention with calculated vocal boredom. Machiavelli understood that influence operates through controlling psychological states. Content matters only after attention is captured. Attention is captured through vocal patterns that exploit neurological mechanisms. Master vocal control, and you control minds, regardless of what you're actually saying. The world will never reward speakers whose vocal delivery lets audiences drift mentally. But those who weaponize whisper drops, strategic pauses, volume explosions, rhythmic acceleration, authority tones, and calculated boredom, they command paralyzed attention and total psychological control. If this video revealed how your voice is losing you power, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to understand vocal dominance. And subscribe because we're having conversations about real power that others won't. Outthink the crowd. Control attention. Weaponize your voice. Now, I want you to drop this final affirmation in the comments. My voice controls psychology. Attention obeys me. Now go dominate through vocal warfare. The world is waiting.